Today we're going to look at learning target 4, which is to assign and label the independent variable and the dependent variable and relate them to the domain and range. Now you can find these at the bottom of the front of the second page of your notes, the first part where it says learning targets 1 through 5. We're going to look at learning target 4 today. If you don't have your notes out right now, along with something to write with, then go ahead and pause this video and get those out right now. Okay, so when we're thinking about the independent variable is the input of the function. This is what you are changing or what can be controlled in the situation. And then the domain goes along with the independent variable. The domain is all the possible values of the independent variable. The dependent variable is the output of the function, and this depends on the input. The range goes along with that, and it is all the possible values of the dependent variable. So whenever you have a situation, for example, the amount of sunlight a plant gets determines how tall it will grow, you can look at that. And I always like to underline the two different things that are happening. So here we have the amount of sunlight a plant gets, and we have how tall it will grow. One of those is the independent, and one of those is the dependent. The independent is the thing that you can change in the situation, which is the amount of sunlight a plant gets. You can move it in a window or not in a window. So we're going to say amount of sunlight here. And then how tall it will grow depends on that, so that's the dependent variable. If I'm writing too fast or going too fast, remember you can always pause this video or back up a little bit and do what you need to do. Now turn the page. In a graph, the independent variable and the dependent variable will always be found in these places. The independent variable will always be along the x-axis, and the dependent variable will always be along the y-axis. So whenever you're going to graph a situation, you need to think about what's the independent variable and what's the dependent variable and put them in the right spots. In a table, the independent comes first, and the dependent comes in the second column. So looking at this table right here, if we want to know what the independent and dependent variable in the domain and range are, we can just look at these top headings. The independent variable always comes first. So here, the independent variable is the ounces of water, and the dependent variable is the plant height. The domain is all the values of the independent variable. So I'm going to write them in brackets like this, a little bracket there, and then I'm just going to list them. I'm going to list them in order from smallest to biggest because that helps me make sure that I can get them all, but that's not necessary. 2, 3, 8, 10, 15, 20, 27. And then the range is all the values of the dependent variable. So we have 10, 23, 31, 42, 48, 52, and 73. Now, so in a table, you can always use, this is called set notation with these brackets to help you list all of the elements. In a table or in a graph, the independent variable, because there is no label on the x-axis, we'll just call it x. And the dependent variable, because there's no label here, we'll just call it y. The domain is all the values of x that this graph covers. Now it doesn't make sense to list all of them because this is a continuous graph. There's infinite many points on this line. We can't list infinitely many points. So we're just going to say the starting point, which is back here at -3, and then the farthest to the right point, which is at 2, And I'm going to leave space in here because there's this notation right here means and all the x's in between. So it goes from negative 3 to a positive 2 and all the x's in between. Really this is saying x is greater than negative 3, but x is smaller than 2. So from negative 3 to 2 and all the x's in between. For the range, we're looking at the y values. The lowest y value is down here at negative 2. The highest y value is up here at 3. And all the y values in between. Looking at this next graph, the independent variable is time in minutes. The dependent variable is portion of students able to locate suitable materials. Because remember that the independent variable is whatever they're talking about on the x-axis, and the dependent variable is whatever they're talking about on the y-axis. Now the domain, because this is a continuous graph and there's infinitely many points along this line, we are going to use the inequality notation here. So we are going to say from 5 all the way to 30, and all the x's in between is the domain. All these x's in here are covered. And then the range is going to go from about, we'll say like 25, estimating, to, it looks like all the way up to 100, and all the y's in between. Turn the page and there's just a little bit up here. The independent variable is whatever's on the x-axis, whatever's on the x-axis, which in this case is just x. And the dependent variable is the y. Now the domain is all the x's. The problem here is that there's not a starting and a stopping point. This arrow means it goes forever to the left and up, and this one means it goes forever to the right and up. So there are a couple different ways you could say this. You could say from negative infinity to positive infinity, and all the x's in between, because it's going to go forever to the left and forever to the right. Or a better way is just to say that the domain covers all real numbers. That's the better way to say it. It means the same thing. It means it goes all the negative numbers out to infinity, negative infinity, all the positive numbers out to positive infinity. Because it stretches the whole span of numbers along the x-axis, because that's what these arrows mean, we can just say all real numbers. So I'm actually going to cross this out, because this is not the best way to say it. This is the best way to say it. Now the range does have a starting point. It starts here at 0. It doesn't go below 0. So this is y equals 0 right here. It starts at 0, and it just goes up. So it has a starting point. There is no ending point. So we're just going to say the first half. So all the y's that are bigger than 0, or you could write it like that. All the y values that are greater than or equal to 0. Everything bigger than 0 is the range. Notice that when I flip where the y is and where the 0 is, I also have to flip the inequality sign. In both situations, it's eating the y because the y values of our graph are greater than or bigger than 0. And that's it for Learning Target 4.